This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
This podcast was supported in part by grant funding from the U.S. Department of Education's Title IX grant program through the University of Illinois Center for Global Studies. The content of this program does not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 4 of Cimiify, where this season we want to help change the system. In our third and final series, we're focused on policy. System change happens both in the grassroots and on the Congress floor. Our policy experts are doing the work of changing the system from within, challenging the assumptions underpinning our resource allocation and ways of governing. The show format is a tad different this season. Each episode is broken into 3 segments. To begin, I'll be joined by one of our researchers on Cimiify to break down what we both heard in my interview with our guest and what you should listen for. Our second segment is, of course, our interview, which is always still hopeful with plenty of inspiration. And finally, our third segment breaks down what we heard as calls for action in the interview itself and what you can do to change the system through climate action. We have a great guest today, Michelle Moore. And before we get to her, we have Jackie Himmel here again as one of our great researchers here at Climify to talk more about what you should be listening for in this episode. Jackie, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to be back. And we have a really highly anticipated guest to talk about this time.
Yes. Why is she so highly anticipated?
Well, for me, this is the first time I've ever got to interview and have a firsthand experience with somebody who's been at the front lines for climate policy.
Mhm.
She's really got to work with people and make change, and you'll find out later in the episode how she's kind of had her hands in everything. And it's also really nice to just have our questions answered because I think
Yeah.
a lot of us want to know what's happening in
What's happening
policy.
in the White House, right? She worked with
Exactly.
we won't divulge the president who she worked with, but she worked
Yeah.
with.
Yeah. So just getting to pick her brain about things. And
Mhm.
she made me feel good. There's
Yeah.
sometimes a lot of policies out there where you don't feel so good anymore. So it's nice to hear her perspective and how she encourages us to make a change.
Well, tell us more about Michelle Moore. Who is she and what does she do?
So, Michelle Moore, the first thing I think everybody should really know is she had a very normal upbringing. She started in a very small town in Georgia where she witnessed and experienced the really downsides of environmental policy
Mhm.
and environmental justice because since she was in a small town, she kind of got the back end of the support of her local government, which ended up inspiring her. And I don't want to give away too much, but that really inspired her to work her way up through different ways of policy to get to the big White House, the big house.
Yeah.
And she was able to work with a really great team and she had the backing, and it's really always nice to have people on your team who encourage you to keep pushing and make change.
Mhm.
Uh, but on the other end, she talks about how when she left the White House, there was a lot of change that happened too, and sometimes not in the best way. Some things you should really pay attention to for Michelle Moore is she's the author of her own book, Rural Renaissance, where she describes her upbringing, how that has inspired her, and has led her to her nonprofit that she started. It's called Groundswell, and she'll be talking more about how that has helped her, how the community has inspired her, and how she gives back to the community via energy and sustainability. And she also, like we had said, she has really been up there in the administrations for a certain president. But her biggest accomplishments were cutting the government's energy bill by 11 billion. And she explains more about how she helped do that and how she had a great team to help influence renewable energy towards climate policy.
What are the foundational elements of her that I guess, support her mission for a renewable future, right? And it was super interesting to talk to her about values.
She's had some great mentors as well that you'll hear about that have
Mhm.
inspired her and given her the gumption to really keep going.
Yeah.
And I'm excited for listeners to hear her great one liners because you listen
Yes.
to them and you're like, oh my gosh, I feel inspired.
Yeah. Do well by doing good was my favorite.
Yes. Yes. That one, it's so simple, but so true.
Yeah. Well, without further ado, Michelle Moore. Well, welcome, Michelle. I'm glad to have you here on Climify, and it's really nice to talk with you again. It's been a couple years, right?
It has been, and it is delightful to be here with you. I was so appreciative of the invitation to join.
Yeah, we had you high on the list, so I'm glad that it all worked out. This season is all about changing the system, and I was wondering how you define the system.
To me, the system, or the most important point of intervention to trying to change the system is actually the values that underpin it.
The
Because
values.
systems produce outcomes according to the values that they're grounded on. So, the system, any system is just a set of rules that mechanic. And we can tinker all we want with the way the machine works or with the output of the machine, but any system is going to tend to revert to whatever values underpin it. So when we think
Mhm.
about our energy systems, for example, whether we're talking about the technical infrastructure systems that produce energy, that generate, distribute energy, or if we broaden our aperture to consider the financial systems that underpin how all those assets get built and managed, our current systems are built on extractive models
Yes.
from
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
19th century.
Hmm.
And we can tinker all we want with the type of electrons that we produce. But if we don't really peel the layers back and inquire about the values behind the system design and really intervene at that values level, we're just going to get the same outcomes with a different flavor of electron.
Yeah.
And we risk building a clean energy dystopia.
That sounds terrible.
See,
Yeah.
it's a sci-fi movie. Actually, it's several sci-fi movies that have
Yeah.
been
Like Mad
released over
Max.
the past decade.
Yeah. Waterworld.
Among them, I'm trying to think of, there was one with, oh my gosh, I can see his face now. Elysium, I think, was one of them.
Oh, yeah,
So yeah,
definitely. I mean, yeah, yeah. With Matt Damon and gosh, Jodie Foster was in that one, wasn't? That's where they were
she was
complaining about her accent, right? She had
among them.
among
Among the
there was
movies in which
a
they
lot of
complained about
problems.
her accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What values do you think need to be there for this hopefully clean energy, climate justice system needs to be founded on?
Some that I embrace, and I would state just up front that for me personally, my work in this field and my commitment is really about my faith
Hmm.
and asking myself daily, how do we love our neighbors as ourselves through the way our energy systems work? So, values to me that are incredibly important to build into our clean energy futures are justice in a do justice as a commandment kind of sense, and love for our neighbors. And
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of what that means in practice. In the 19th century, before we switched to burning coal for our power, cities in America were lit by killing whales and burning whale oil. And so coal at that time was progress. But then at some point, we became aware of the fact that extracting and burning fossil fuels had a lot of unjust impacts. Unjust in terms of the consequences for human health, for miners, for people working in or living near those energy generation plants. And then significant and terrible impacts for all of us from a climate perspective. And if love, loving our neighbors, and justice, doing justice, were part of the design of our energy systems, then we would have been like, whoa, hold up, we got to do something. But in fact, extractive economics and profit as the end all be all has been at the core of the values
Hmm.
in our energy systems and many other systems too. So what happened? Lots of fighting and lots of politics to forestall a transformation of our energy systems to try to preserve the most profit for people who own those assets for the longest period of time. So again, just inquiring about those values. And for me, love for our neighbors and doing justice
Yeah.
are two critical and for me, biblically rooted values that need to be at the core of what we do.
Yeah. So if greed and power were still the same values of our renewable energy system, we'd still,
Yeah.
yeah,
Money. We'd be doing the same thing
yeah.
with different assets.
Well, was that part of your inspiration to getting into climate policy? Just how you grew up, how you were raised? Was that part of your being turned on to climate policy?
For me, it was really about justice and doing the right thing. I'm from a small town in rural West Georgia, and my hometown, LaGrange, is right next door to a big Army Corps lake, West Point Lake, or the backwaters, as we called it.
The backwaters.
And it's formed by damming up the Chattahoochee River. Upstream from my hometown of LaGrange is the city of Atlanta. And the city of Atlanta had at the time and still has a bit of a problem with combined sewage overflows, as many cities do. And
Mhm.
basically, in layman's terms, when it rains too much, it overwhelms the storm sewer system. And so the city just dumps a bunch of chlorine into the sewage and then dumps poop into the river. And it ends up
Terrible.
in my hometown. And there would be
Mm.
days and days, or sometimes weeks during the summer when there was so much poop in the water that you couldn't safely swim in it. And you sure wouldn't catch
Jeez.
any fish and eat them. And everybody knew what was happening. It's not like the city of Atlanta or Fulton County didn't understand what happened when it rained. And as many folks listening to this podcast probably know, it rains a lot in the afternoon in the South during the summertime.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah.
daily event.
Yeah. I lived in
Um,
Florida for a while. Every
there you
afternoon.
go.
Yeah. Every afternoon.
That's kind of tropical climate.
Yeah.
And but yet they continued doing it. Why? Because it cost too much to fix the problem because
Mhm.
of money. Because money was more important than health and the quality of the
Yeah.
environment for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who lived along that watershed, not to mention the folks in Florida who made their money catching shrimp and fishing and outdoor industries that really depended on the quality
Mhm.
of that resource. And that's what inspired me to get into environment and sustainability is I just didn't understand, and I still don't understand how folks can know that what they're doing is wrong and
Yeah.
that what they're doing hurts other people and hurts the future, but it makes a little bit more money so they keep at it.
Yeah. So they
Don't
still
get
do
it.
it. Right.
I just don't get it.
Well, if you've been on the architectural tour of Chicago on the Chicago River, that's a similar story that usually all the guides tell is how they reversed the Chicago River and dumped all that sewage away from Lake Michigan, but down to St. Louis, right? They just
Yep.
sent it. So it's not an isolated incident, unfortunately.
No. And it gets back to your question about systems.
Mhm.
The design of the system optimizes profit at the expense of everything that we say that we hold truly dear.
Mm.
And if we think about profit, or if we think about benefit in a more expansive way, system benefits, including human health and supporting families, supporting environmental quality that supports all of us as human beings, rather than this hyper narrow definition around dollars that tend to accrue to a very small percentage of the population, then we would make very different decisions and our systems would be healthy.
Well, how did you get from LaGrange, Georgia to the Obama administration?
A
'Cause that
long and
sounds like a
winding
great
path.
story. Yeah.
It makes sense in retrospect. Um, I grew up in LaGrange and I went on to get my bachelor's at Emory and my graduate degree at Georgetown School of Foreign Service. I spent a very challenging year living in New York City, which was not for me at the
Mm.
and ended up living out my worst nightmare as a child, which was moving back to my hometown and
Oh,
going to
no.
work in a textile mill.
Oh, no.
But it was for Interface Inc.
Yeah,
Ray
wonderful.
Anderson, who is the first CEO of a public company to commit to not just being sustainable, but ultimately restorative. And I joined Interface just a few months after what Ray always called the spear in his chest when he realized after reading Paul Hawkins' Ecology of Commerce, what the impact of his manufacturing operations were doing. So I got to see up close and personal how how Ray Anderson led Interface in an effort to do well by doing good. Do well by doing good is always how he talked about the work. And Interface was profitable in economic terms. It generated a lot of shareholder value. It sustained hundreds and hundreds of jobs in my hometown and thousands of jobs around the world. And it set a new standard
Yeah.
for what it meant to be operationally excellent, not just in the flooring industry, carpet. It's not an industry a lot of folks spend a long time talking about, but in the building industry, which is one of the largest and oldest industries in the entire world. And watching how Ray did that, and watching how a corporation in a small town, a very conservative part of America, went through this extraordinary transformation and what the ripple effects were. A ripple effects that were indirect and ripple effects that folks at Interface banged on
Yeah.
every day, all the time, really inspired me in my work and led me from Interface to a tech startup to shifting into the nonprofit space, working as a senior leader with the U.S. Green Building Council and helping to propagate the LEED green building rating system
Right.
around
Yeah.
the world, to working with the Clinton Climate Initiative, which became the C40 cities, to joining the Obama administration as the federal environmental executive was the title. Or as
It's a
essentially
great
the chief
name.
sustainability. It's a in the government everything gets abbreviated. So you're the federal environmental executive, otherwise known as the FEE. It's essentially the chief sustainability officer for the administration, and the title was ultimately changed to that. But it was just a real blessing to be there and to be able to bring everything I learned going back to my little hometown and working for Interface and Ray Anderson
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
sustainability in the federal government.
So Ray Anderson, I read Mid-Course Correction, I believe, and he also has another book called Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. So
Yeah.
two great books. I did buy some of his Interface tile carpeting. It's actually in my paper studio still. So I was a big fan of his when I was in grad school. Still am, but that's when I discovered him.
He's an excellent leader. And for me personally, really wonderful role model. And I think that if someone went back and did a little research one of these days and looked not only at the direct impact of Interface, but what the Interface alumni around the world
Yeah.
have done in their work, the impact would be inspiring.
Who are some of the famous alumni that you know of?
Coming out of Interface, I think that there are a lot of people who are, who are unsung.
Yeah.
I don't know that they're really sustainability celebrities, but they're people who've had extraordinary impacts. One person who comes to mind immediately and who is a very well recognized leader in the field is George Bandy.
Mm.
And George Bandy has held not only some extraordinarily important leadership roles in sustainability around the field, but served as the chair of the board for the US GBC and GBCI, with a global impact. And there are many others who've gone on from careers at Interface into bringing that ethos and commitment to sustainability, that ethos and commitment to sustainability into adjacent fields as well. I think about Jeremy Bond, who launched Bond Studios and is helping to share the story of sustainability in a way that is vastly more inclusive and celebrates diversity and the contribution of diversity in the field and the importance of diversity to the future of the field as well. And those are two names among dozens and dozens and dozens who transform material science and design as well.
Yeah, I think there's so many people, even if you're listening today, maybe it's one of you that are doing great things for the world, and celebrity status doesn't matter.
It really doesn't. Attention is overvalued. It's really about the impact that you have on people and the good that you do at the end of the day. And that's the substance of the work. And
Mhm.
that's the joy in the work as well.
So, as someone, meaning me, who hasn't served in any sort of administration of a president, did they call you? Did they email you? And did you believe it when when you got the invitation to serve in the Obama administration?
I got a call. I was sitting in a meeting one day and I had this number came up on my cell phone. It just said 202, didn't have the full telephone number on
202.
it, just 202. I was like, oh my gosh, I was worried that my house alarm was full.
Right.
So I
Kind of
immediately
frightening.
picked it up in a panic. And the person on the other end said, this is so and so with the White House. And for the role of federal environmental executive, there were a few folks who had recommended that they reach out to me. And I was surprised, extraordinarily surprised, and humbled and honored
Mhm.
to get that call. And tremendously honored to serve as well. And regardless of what role you have or in what administration, it is public service.
Yeah.
It's public service. You're serving all of the people, whether they like you or not, whether they like your boss or not, and trying every day to make the best decisions that you can for the public good.
What were some of the most important, do you feel, policies that you worked on when you were in working alongside the White House?
There are two things that immediately pop to mind. One is work that myself and my office did in collaboration with the Navy and with the Department of Defense to commit to large scale renewable energy purchases. The
Wow.
commitment started with the U.S. Department of the Navy, with Secretary Mavis, who committed to purchasing a gigawatt of renewable energy.
A gigawatt. And
And
how much is a gigawatt? Is that like,
it said a gigawatt's a lot. It's
okay,
I think
good.
at the time there was enough renewable energy, I think, to power a little north of 700,000 homes. If you think about it
Oh,
in terms of
okay. That's
maybe
huge.
it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot. I mean, the Defense Department as a whole is the largest single energy consumer in the entire U.S. economy. So what they do really matters. And Navy's leadership, which President Obama announced in one of his State of the Union addresses, was quickly followed by Army and Air Force. And so DOD as a whole committed to 3 gigawatts of new renewable energy
Wow.
purchases. And this was in the early 20 teens. I think it was starting in 2012 was when the commitments were announced. And at the time, there was very little renewable energy being developed in the US. Solar was more expensive and it was an earlier stage of the marketplace. So, as with many other technologies, DoD making a big, bold commitment and using the size of their supply chain really helped to build markets. In my home state of Georgia, for example, the
Hmm.
very first large scale renewable energy project in Georgia was a Navy backed power purchase agreement, a PPA. And the scale of that initial solar project to meet the demand of the US Navy really helped to build the market, bring down the cost for everybody,
Yeah.
and ultimately helped Georgia become one of the top 10 solar states in America. And DOD helped to make that happen. And my office worked with DOD to
Right,
help bring
right.
that to fruition. And the other thing that stands out to me, and I think that this is something that anybody can do, you don't have to have a giant supply chain, including the largest energy consumer in the US economy.
Right.
That was to launch what we called the Green Gov Awards. And one of the things that the White House can do uniquely well, or uniquely in a high profile way, but that everybody can do is just say thank you,
Hmm.
right? To recognize good work and to recognize good work in a way that really sees the substance, the love of what people are doing, whether it's a big ticket project or a little one. So the Green Gov Awards were simply about inviting every single member of the federal community, the couple of million employees of the federal government, to participate in making recommendations for what the president should do on sustainability. What are the things that would really move the needle? And then for people and teams who got great project done, to give them the opportunity to recommend one another and to be selected for award so that the White House could say thank you and celebrate what they had gotten done. And that simple act of recognition, seeing people's good work and saying thank you, built a tremendous amount of momentum and really helped to institutionalize those practices even more deeply than they had been before across the federal family. And the federal reach is huge. I know people have different perspectives about the government too big, government too small, what should the government be
Yeah.
doing? But the human beings who work for our government do great things every day. And there are more than 2 million employees of the federal
2
government
million.
all over the country. And that's a lot of people doing a lot of good stuff. So
That is.
saying thank
That
you
is.
just amplifies the good.
Yeah, we're kind of distant from it, but it's good to hear that statistic, right? And that
Mhm.
people do care and they're there working every day on this.
Absolutely. It's just not necessarily visible. And the vast majority of it's not even in DC. It's
Yeah.
outside DC.
Is
It's
it?
in
Okay.
Georgia, it's in Alabama, it's in
Not making the nightly
Illinois and
news.
Indiana. No, alas,
Not on the
our
news.
news media, that's a whole different story.
That's a different podcast. We won't go there.
That's a different podcast.
But that ties into like the idea of saying thank you. This is a lesson that I learned in my leadership roles is that goes a long way just to say thank you.
Gratitude.
Mhm. Kindness,
Gratitude.
right? Just going back to
Mhm.
those values you talked about in the beginning of the show.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I actually, I hate to ask this question, but what were the emotions then you felt when you left your job and President Trump took over, probably dismantled a lot of the really good work that you and countless other people did. Yeah. What was the feelings you had at the time? And maybe
On a
still do.
single day.
Yeah. Yeah.
It happened on a single day with the stroke of a pen.
Did it
I
really?
think that, well, with the vast majority of environmental executive orders, although I would note that the one executive order, environmental executive order that did not get rescinded, that had been implemented during the Obama era was the federal sustainability executive orders. They stayed in place.
Hmm.
And the
You forgot about it, huh?
well, the Trump administration, I don't know the inside story, obviously, but historically, federal sustainability is an effort that had broad bipartisan support. It was initiated originally under President Clinton, but really advanced and expanded under the Bush administration. And
I didn't know that.
the work enjoyed, yeah, the work enjoyed broad bipartisan support on the Hill. Actually, at the beginning of the Trump administration, myself, together with all of the previous Federalist environmental executives, wrote a joint op-ed that was published in Greenbiz that supported the work and encouraged the Trump administration to keep it going. And ultimately, the Trump administration did issue its own executive order that refocused on energy efficiency
Hmm.
and I think also environmental management systems. But the work continued in a different form.
Yeah.
And that is really thanks to the institutionalization of the work, right? It's again, those heroes who are everyday folks working in the federal government,
Hmm.
folks on the Hill, political appointees who see the value in sustainability. And whether you're red or blue or somewhere in between, we may use some different words. We
Yeah.
may have different ideas about where the endpoints of the work are, but there's a core that historically everybody has been able to agree on. And that's really resonant and demonstrated in the fact that that component of the work continued through the Trump administration and exists still today.
Hmm. So I've heard this before where sometimes taking the the term climate change out of an initiative, but you talk about things like efficiency, or you talk about supporting your family, or things that are more, I would say, in the different parties can agree upon. That kind of language actually can sometimes go a lot farther than saying this is a climate action initiative. Has that been your experience too?
My experience is that the policy rhetoric, I'm doing little air quotes here, policy rhetoric, or the political with air quotes rhetoric can alienate everyday people in general.
Yeah,
Climate change can feel so overwhelming. It can
it does.
feel so oppressive
Yeah.
that even for people who would prioritize taking action on climate change as among their top three things that need to be done nationally and globally, it's so big it can make anything that you do as an individual feel like small ball, right?
Right.
Like you can't make a difference.
Hmm.
And that is that's a retort that's a rhetorical or problem with the rhetoric. I don't know what the right word is. That's a problem. That's
There
a
we go. There
problem
we go.
outside, whether you're talking politics or something that makes a little bit more common sense. And I find that finding ways to talk about climate change or the actions that we can take as individuals in a way that's a little more relevant at the kitchen table
Hmm.
is the best approach, no matter what. The policy layer, if you will, talks about things in aggregate and big words with climate change, GDP, whatever. And and a lot of those issues don't really have a lot of resonance with people's everyday lives. Even if they feel the impacts of climate change, they may not feel like they can do anything about it. So I talk a lot more about resilience.
Hmm.
Resilience matters to people. That's something that everyone can understand. It's a heart issue, not a head issue.
Yeah, a hard issue. I like
Efficiency.
that.
That's what you have to do. I mean, like
Yeah.
I don't know what T90 percentage of the population has ever been swayed by a statistic.
Yeah, I'm not.
But you know what?
Yeah.
When when people feel something or when an idea really resonates with their spirit, that's when they're motivated to take action. That's when they're motivated to do something different. Or they're inspired towards a better future. And I think that we, all of us, and particularly people who are focused on sustainability and making sure that we have a healthy climate today and in the future for the
Yeah.
next generation, would do well to paint a vision of possibility and give people something good to move forwards, rather something rather than something that's so big and so scary
Yeah.
that it just makes a lot of people want to like buy a big SUV and move into a abandoned missile silo
Right.
to
Right.
get away from the
They're prepping
apocalypse.
for the apocalypse with their.
Yeah, it's a little apocalyptic out there in the news headlines today,
It sure
and
is.
me too. I love a happy ending. We need a happy ending that we can build towards together.
Yeah, you're a good inspiration, though. Think about it from small town LaGrange to helping the Department of Defense lower the cost of renewable energy for everybody.
It's all the same thing, though, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're
Yeah.
talking about it in in the context of DoD and DoD's mission, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for our military services and the men and women who serve in uniform in uniform and as civilians. Many of my family members are veterans. Some of them still serve. You're protecting America and fulfilling our missions, fulfilling the defense mission by using clean, homegrown power here that we can control. Sort of said in less pleasant terms, renewable energy with some energy storage tacked onto it makes our military more lethal. And it's also cleaner. And it's being a better neighbor. And it's doing what DoD has done many times before, which is scaling up a great new technology so it's accessible to everybody in a good way. And that's no different than what Ray Anderson and Interface was doing. That's no different than what Ray Anderson and Interface were doing, which is leaving the world a better place than they found it and doing
Mm.
well by doing good, right? Doing well in a way that was not at somebody else's expense, but that was creating jobs and healthier places and spaces and a healthier buildings industry for everybody. And it's just a matter of how we define our mission in the context of our values, which in both of those instances includes care for our neighbors and care for something that's bigger than us and something that extends vastly beyond not just the immediate term, but vastly beyond our lifetime as individuals.
Well, you're obviously not still in the Obama administration. You are running a great nonprofit called Groundswell. Can you talk more about what you do and what Groundswell does?
Groundswell builds community power, and we mean that in every sense of the word. We do it for and with communities that have lower household incomes that may struggle with energy burdens or with environmental justice issues and legacy pollution. We do it to cut energy burdens in half,
Hmm.
and we do it with clean energy, community solar, community resiliency hubs, and energy efficiency, a residential energy efficiency that we really see as an investment in housing equity. And Groundswell's core values include joyful service, respect, taking care of one another, excellence, getting good stuff done.
Yeah, I like those. These are very similar to our mission and core values here. We want to get stuff done, especially around climate justice. Well, what does community mean to you? And do you believe that it is important when you talk about climate change and environmental justice?
Defining the term community makes me think about that wonderful Charles and Ray Eames film, Powers of 10.
I love
Do you
that
remember
film.
that?
Oh,
Oh,
I
yeah, I
show
do
it to my
too.
students because it's all about systems. That whole
It's so
film.
it's incredibly powerful,
I
incredibly
love it.
powerful. That's how I think about community too. Community can be our immediate circle, our families, our close friends. Community can be our professional circles. It could be the places that we live. It could be our neighborhood. It could be more transient, which intransitive. Is that a word? That's a word, right? It can be
It's a word. I've definitely heard it. So you're
intransitive. It
fine.
can be like, more intransitive, but it can be more conceptual
Hmm.
in terms of how we define our community. Our communities could include people we don't know, people we may never interact with, but rooting community power in an energy sense of the word, rooting our energy systems in the network of human beings that those
Hmm.
systems are serving or otherwise impacting, maybe not serving well, really challenges our design approach to energy systems. And for Groundswell, it's critical both as a design input, partnering with the people, with the communities that we serve in program and project design, going back to the people and the communities that we serve to ask how we get a
Yeah.
partner in continuous improvement, really having community centered governance around our projects and programs and thinking about community benefits. So when we are measuring the impact of our projects and our programs, we're not just looking in economic terms. We're not just measuring unit outputs of GHG emissions. We're also thinking about human impacts and using tools like human centered design and net promoter score is a tidy metric for
Yeah.
understanding
Yeah.
how
Yeah.
we're doing as a way to grade our homework and make sure that we're continuously improving in what we do too.
I love the fact that design has been a part of Groundswell and I think as designers sometimes we wonder if we're making an impact, but hearing that is good. It's good to hear.
critically important. And human-centered design actually is borrowed from IDEO, from a
Right.
design firm.
Right. Yeah,
And
definitely.
that's the methodology that we've adopted.
You just wrote a book. I don't know the subtitle, but it's Rural Renaissance. What was the full name of the book?
Now you've asked me that. I'm going to have to pull out a copy of it.
See, I don't remember the subtitle for my book either, but they made me put it on there. I just know the first part of it.
It's
So,
revitalizing our hometowns with clean power.
Rural Renaissance.
So rural renaissance is the most important part of it, though.
It is. It is. And I'm guessing here, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What was your motivation for writing that? And I have a guess. I have a guess.
For me, I love rural America. I love small towns. I love my hometown. And I just wanted to make what I had learned and what I had learned how to do, including the lumps and bumps, right? Not just the good stuff, but the hard stuff too, accessible and available to other people everywhere who might want to bring clean power to their hometown as a way to help revitalize it into the future as well. So it's really about sharing. That was my motivation. I wanted to share
Mhm.
and hopefully inspire and inform other folks in how to do what I was trying to do too.
Yeah. Well, how did it feel going back to your hometown to fix some of the problems that you had to live with?
It was awesome. I mean, it was really, it was joyful. It still is incredibly joyful work. As I share in Rural Renaissance, my grandparents, my mama and papa Knob and my mama and papa Moore, both lived in the Dunson Mill Village.
Hmm.
And they worked in the cotton mills their whole lives too. And I love their homes. Their homes are more home to me than any place I've ever lived. But their homes would also generate a $500 utility bill in the winter when they would have to cut the heat on to keep the pipes from freezing.
Yeah.
So I know from my grandparents' experiences what it's like to get a bill that's bigger than what you can pay. And I also know what it's like just to throw on the layers and the blankets on the bed because there's no heat in the bedroom at night. I can remember being a little kid and you could see smoke in your breath when you laid down to go to bed. And I just wanted to help people and put what I had learned how to do with my fancy degrees and some of the titles I've had to work for people like my grandparents, people like who I
Mhm.
grew up with my neighbors, with my community. And I'm thrilled that we're going to be able to very significantly expand on that now too. I don't know, Eric, that we've even shared this with y'all yet, but Groundswell was selected as an EPA Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund Solar for All awardee. Kind of a mouthful. It's not
Congratulations.
energy
Yeah.
if there's no acronym, but we've been selected for a $156 million award
Wow.
to build community solar and
Huge.
associated energy source. Yep. Across 8 states throughout the Southeast. We'll be able to cut energy bills in half for more than
Wow.
10,000 families,
Wow.
tens of thousands of people across the Southeast.
That's amazing. When did you find this out?
Just on Earth Day. So it's very, very recent
Couple weeks
news.
ago. Couple weeks
Yeah.
ago.
Yep.
No, we didn't know that. That's amazing.
We're breaking it here.
Breaking
Breaking it
news.
here. So
This is going to change
yeah,
people's lives.
it will. It will. I mean, some of the places that we're going to be building projects are my hometown of LaGrange, Georgia. Places like Yazoo City, Mississippi, Lynette, Alabama, Lafayette, Alabama, Washita, Arkansas, and more. It's Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, North Central Florida.
Are you
And
targeting kind of the more rural parts? Is that the big part?
most of our partners are rural.
Right.
We'll have projects in rural, urban, and suburban areas, but more than 50% of the places and the people that we'll be serving are rural. And I just can't wait to get rolling. As I was sharing with my colleagues here at Groundswell the other day, when I think about my career so far in public, my career so far in public service, or service to a mission, service to how can I give back with
Yeah.
what I know how to do and who I am and what I can accomplish. this is my hallelujah. And it's
It,
very personal to me. It's
congrats.
very personal to me to be able to go back home, not just to Georgia, but to my region and really serve in a way that will be seeking to build energy systems with better values at their root.
Mm, yeah, and using your language, I hope that this can change hearts in
Yeah,
that area, right? Because I do think politics get in the way there, right? Because this isn't about I mean, politics is involved in everything, but this particular program that you're going to be running is going to affect the ability for people to do more things in their life because they'll have
yeah,
more money to do it, right?
absolutely. And to some of our previous conversation, it takes energy systems and solar systems in this case, and really makes it a kitchen table issue.
Mhm.
It's not some far off thing in Washington. It's not a 3,000-acre solar project landing in your backyard. It's a solar project with the battery on the roof of your neighborhood church that's helping to cut bills in half for your neighbors who always struggle to pay their bills.
Mhm.
And it will serve grandma. It'll serve our elders who are living on very limited means, sometimes in homes that have decayed a good bit, homes that need a lot of repairs, homes that cost way too much to live in. And it'll really help to reinvest in the quality
Yeah,
of rural housing through the work that we're doing too. So I could not be more excited. It is joyful work.
it does sound like it. For well, based on your experience, what do you have any words of wisdom for anyone listening who wants to help change the system to fight climate change, but do not have the policies, do not have maybe the financial support to do so, or they believe they don't have this?
I'll quote Ray Anderson here as well with some great advice that he shared with me, but he also shared Austin and in many venues, including in his books. And that is that you change one mind at a time,
Hmm.
one mind at a time, one heart at a time.
Yeah, there you go.
So when you're trying to make the world a better place, including when you're trying to address the causes and the impacts of climate change, there's no such thing as small ball.
Hmm.
There's no such thing as small ball.
Yeah,
And attention really doesn't matter.
yeah,
It doesn't. Attention is not going to change anybody's mind. So talk to your friends and neighbors. Find something you can do, something you can share, and just have every confidence that every step, no matter how small it feels in terms of the kinds of metrics that I think really distract us as a society and as a civilization today, like keep on your path and root your actions in your values and be explicit about that.
hmm,
Talk to folks about your why. Tell people about your values, not just about the action that you're taking. And you'll spread a whole lot of goodwill and a whole lot of love and a whole lot of good results in the process. And it'll be stuff you can go home at night and feel good about.
yeah. Well, I get the feeling based on hearing stories like yours. I've been finding some of these in the news, good news, that we have some good momentum going around policies in environmental justice and climate action. How do we keep this momentum moving in that policy world, considering, hey, it's an election here in the year here in the US? What are your insights into that?
I will quote my friend Jigger Shaw: deploy, deploy, deploy. When it comes to climate and clean energy, we are operating in an environment of abundance like nothing I've ever seen in my 30-year career and probably will never see again.
Mm,
There are extraordinary federal resources. There are state and local resources that are moving out now too, but we've got 1.4 trillion when you look at the Inflation Reduction Act and then
yeah,
also the related energy and infrastructure investments and the bipartisan infrastructure law in
that was a big
DC.
deal.
That was a huge deal. Uncle Ira and Uncle Bill. And regardless of what your local politics may be, get the money and bring it home. And
Yeah.
I will repeat that for emphasis, get the money and bring it home. And those resources are precious. And those resources give us the tools that we need to reinvest in our rural communities, to
Yeah.
invest in environmental justice communities and make sure that, people and communities and places that have really taken it on the chin in terms of our legacy energy systems are not only among the first to benefit from clean energy, but they are real, but that those same people and communities have the opportunity to build wealth with jobs, with energy asset ownership. They keep more money in their pocket because they're not having to send it off to their utility with a ginormous electricity bill.
Right.
They're just tremendous opportunities. But policy doesn't change anything in and of itself. Policy has to be implemented.
Got
And
it.
Washington cannot implement, right? Washington cannot reach in and make it happen at the local level. Local people make it happen at the local level.
Hmm.
So that would be my most important and urgent advice. Plea, even, not even advice. That's my plea.
Plea. Yeah.
Deploy, deploy, deploy. And remember, people implement. Policy just enables.
That's beautiful. I'm thinking about the local multiplier effect, right? It's 7 times. Is that right? The money stays in the local community has a 7 times impact versus if it is sent out, right?
And that's just the money metric, right? Think
Right.
about
Right.
that in terms of human health. Think about that in terms of just well being. Think about that in terms of living in a place that your kids can stay and get a job and raise their kids there too. There are all sorts of intransible benefits that aren't even touched by even an impressive multiplier effect like that.
Well, one of my favorite questions if not my favorite question that I ask everyone, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say to this, but if you were teaching a design class, what would you assign?
Well, clearly, I'm not just a fan of design. I'm
You
someone
use it.
who's incorporated design and design thinking into everything that we do. So, first, I would just encourage all your design students that design, whether you're talking about policy or whether you're talking about a clean energy project, and good
Hmm.
design that is well specified and has the right objectives and outcomes in mind is fundamental to any good solution.
Hmm.
Everybody can benefit from a great designer, but I would challenge your students to design a better future, design a picture, something that people can see, touch, and feel that represents what taking climate action today would mean 20 years from now or for the next generation. And try to get some more inspiration into this situation out there
Yeah.
and show people that things can be better, that it's not just hiding from the zombie apocalypse or relegating ourselves to the terrible global impacts of unchecked climate change, but that we can do better and we can be better and we can live better. And that future of possibility is out there for us.
Everyone can benefit from a good designer. I'm going to quote you on that. If I write another book again,
Absolutely.
that's going to be the first quote in the book.
I remembered my subtitle, by the way.
Did you? Okay.
Revitalizing America's hometowns through clean power.
Isn't that
The
wild?
girl,
You just sort of, it happens to me all the time, right? Where I can't remember something and then just go on with your daily life and then boom, it hits you.
floats back up to the top.
Right.
But rural renaissance is the most important part of it.
If anyone remembers anything about the book, Rural Renaissance, when I heard the title, I was thinking about like the Rural Electrification Administration in World War II and like the Tennessee Valley Authority, which you are now a member of or on the board of, right?
I am. I was confirmed by the Senate in 2022.
Wow. Did you have to
No,
show up?
2023. Yes, I did. I had a Senate hearing and everything.
Oh my gosh, what was that like?
You can watch it online,
Can
actually.
we? I'm going to Google
You
it.
can indeed. Google it. Check it out.
Michelle Moore,
Um,
Senate. What was it called? Was it called
with
The
a
Senate
Senate EPW hearing.
EPW, and EPW
Yeah,
means
Environment and Public Works. It's the
okay.
committee of
Wow.
jurisdiction. Yeah, so I was.
Not very many people from LaGrange get to have an EPW Senate hearing.
It was a real. It was an interesting experience, but an honor to be able to sit in that seat, and I was very grateful to be confirmed in late 2022 and to
Amazing.
be able to serve in that role. I was actually just this past week back home in Georgia, taking a day as a tourist. And I went over to Warm Springs, Georgia, to the little White House. And as most of you probably know, FDR suffered from polio
Right.
and which struck him as an adult. And he found tremendous relief swimming in the pools of the spring waters of hot springs, warm springs, as you might imagine, pretty literally named there. And actually had a residence there in rural Georgia. And some of the storytelling at the little White House just spoke to the inspiration that he found in the people and just the farmers trying to scrape out a living in creating the Rural Electrification Administration because his neighbors, his immediate next door neighbors, and this is a man who had been raised in Hyde Park, New York, and incredible economic privilege. His
Yeah.
neighbors in Warm Springs, Georgia, were dirt farmers. So he got to know just right around the countryside when he was there, taking healing baths and trying to get some relief from the
Yeah.
impacts of polio.
Probably changed his opinion on a number of different things.
It's about your neighbors, y'all. It's about your neighbors.
Yeah. Well, thank you for all the work that you're doing at Groundswell that you've done prior to that. And I'm excited about the big grant that you just got because it's going to change a lot of neighbors' lives.
It will. Southeast Rural Power. Can't wait to get it rolling.
Well, thank you, Michelle. It's been an honor to talk with you and look forward to hearing more about all the good work you're doing.
It's been lovely talking with you today, too, Eric. Thank you so much again for having me on the podcast.
Well, it was really good connecting with Michelle Morgan. Jackie, this section is dedicated to our calls to action, what we heard from Michelle. And I'm curious to know what were the biggest things that you took away from the conversation.
There are so many, but the main things that I hope that also listeners take away from this is she said it over and over, and I think it really reigns true, but do well by doing good.
Mm-hmm.
And her faith has really inspired her through that. Not everybody uses that as their motivator, but she has done so much good for the community. And being active in your community, I think, has also helped her. And I hope that listeners will also realize the importance of having a system and having a community.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And she encourages us to know that there's no such thing as a small step.
Mm.
I mean, she's coming from being able to do all these great things with the Obama administration, and she's really done great things for climate policy. But she also knows that where she grew up, she's like, you can't get there in a day. You can't make these big changes in a day, and you shouldn't expect yourself to. You're only given as much as you're told and as much as you can research. So just do with what you can. She said there's no such thing as a small ball. And I was like, thank you. That you're so right.
Yeah, she had those
Because
great one-liners.
she did. She just was really able to nail them. And you're
Yes.
listening. And I just sometimes it took my breath away. I was like, that's another good one that she said too.
Write those down. Write those
I
down.
know.
Yeah, I think the conversation around faith for me provided a call to action, and that it wasn't. I mean, I think she was underlying message there was use your values as what motivates you to do well by doing good,
Mhm.
right? And if it's faith, it's faith. If it's something else, it's something else, and you should use that, right? And it's guided by that idea of loving your neighbors. And you don't have to love your neighbors and be religious. You
Yeah.
can, right? And I think it's that empathy, right, that we all should have more of for the person standing next to us, right? And if we can do that, I think there's a bigger change coming. And I think she believes that. That's her call to action.
Yeah. She really talks about how resilience matters to
Mhm.
people. And sometimes when we're listening to the government and climate policy, they tend to scare us with using their political rhetoric. And they make climate change seem very like unreachable. And we can't get there, or it's just a very big task. But we just have to remind ourselves why we're doing it. And that's
Yeah.
what she tells us. She has her reasons, and she's like, you, everybody has something important to them. Everybody has a some people or a community or a passion that they love. And climate in supporting climate change, you're supporting those people and your inner circle, because you need to protect the environment in which you do so.
Yeah.
So yeah, so just inspiring people to find their motivation, because at the end of the day, yeah, there's policy, but she said people implement policy.
Hmm.
So yeah, the government is big and scary, but at the end of the day, it's also us too. We're not left in the dark about all of this.
Yeah. I think a call to action from that part of the conversation led me to back to her nonprofit, Groundswell, and the big news that she had about the grant from the government that's going to literally change people's lives
Mhm.
in the South, and especially people who are having financial troubles, who are usually Black or Latino, and getting that renewable energy on their roofs is going to be life changing, right? So I guess my call to action from that was, hey, support groups like Groundswell. If you yourself, hey, if you're not that change maker out there like Michelle that's going and doing it, you can use your pocketbook to help organizations that are, and helping Michelle's organization is literally going to change lives. And that's powerful.
Yeah, she is doing so much good, and she created a nonprofit that will continue to do good for everybody who
Yeah.
participates or can
Hmm.
support it, which is just such a nice thing to know that people are making change and that she has created. And she is one of, I'm sure, many people, like some of the guests will also talk to, that are doing good by doing well by doing good.
Yes, that's what it was. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. I think there's this other thing about what she does as a call to action. And that is for me, because I've been thinking about this for a while, and you mentioned politics and how it can be scary, and there's terrible rhetoric around most of it. But she got involved, right? It wasn't like she ran for office, but you can get involved politically to be a change maker for the climate, and you can be involved in policy without being an elected official. So if you don't think like me, just giving money is enough or doing this podcast is enough, there's still more that can be done being in government without having to run for office. And I guess I learned too that if the president wants you to work for them, they'll call you. They won't
Yeah.
send you an email.
This is just overall a really great episode. Like I
Yes,
said in the beginning, to listen to somebody who's really made change and encourage people to keep making change, to not lose hope and to keep being active and find your support in your community. And Michelle highlights and inspires so
he
easily.
does. Yeah.
So I hope that listeners hear that and take that away as well.
Well, I had a good time unpacking this episode with you, Jackie. And as we wind down here, where can we find Michelle Moore online to learn more about what she does?
Yeah, well, we encourage listeners to check out Michelle's book, Rural Renaissance, to read more about her upbringing and how she got to where she is now and who were her mentors. But if you want to read more about her impacts through climate policy and the Obama administration, you can visit groundswell.org/Michelle Moore.
Thanks for listening. And we want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? We also want to know how you are changing the system. Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Cam Berkins with writing and research by Abigail Zook, Jackie Himmel, and Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Designed by Adam Java. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers and Tink Media for their sage advice to make this season even better than the last. You can find design prompts and more information on all our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers. Next week on Climify, Scott Boylston. Scott is co-author and graduate coordinator of the Design for Sustainability Master's Program at the Savannah College of Art and Design, a groundbreaking program that establishes systems thinking, design strategy, and behavior change as the foundation for design as a form of facilitation. He is the founder of Repurpose Savannah, an award-winning nonprofit organization and author of 4 books, including Designing with Society. He speaks widely on design and sustainability and serves on the board of directors of Catapult Design, a National Design Award winner.
Yeah, so Savannah is known for its trees, right? I mean, it's just a gorgeous town. Well, if you look at, and this is the case in a lot of different situations, if you look at the inequities that exist, where the well-off communities have these beautiful canopies that are tended to by the city government, and some of the lower income communities have nary a tree that they have to take care of on their own. So we went out with temperature meters that we could place on different houses to actually prove what we all knew is the case, that in a changing environment, communities under existing heat threat are under even more threat. And we're talking about health, we're talking about energy bills, we're talking about every kind of factor. And so through some really rigorous, detailed data collection around tree density, around air temperature on the same day at the same time between wealthy neighborhoods and lower wealth neighborhoods, we've identified a few degrees difference on the same day because the direct sun is on these houses, on permeable surfaces,
Oh, I see.
and so on. So we've done a lot of data collection to build knowledge around and change around how everyone from city government to local businesses to community members understand the value of tree canopy.